Am Zurich Economic Impulse treffen sich global und lokal, da trifft sich die Politik mit der Wirtschaft. Global aktiv sein und lokal verankert bleiben, das ist ganz bestimmt eine große Chance, aber eben auch ein Dilemma. Wie positionieren sich also Unternehmen in diesem Umfeld, in diesem Spannungsfeld? Welches sind die großen Probleme und die Herausforderungen dieser sogenannten Glokalisierung? Das wollen wir heute Nachmittag miteinander besprechen und das hören wir auch jetzt von unserem ersten Referenten. Der hat einen ziemlich außergewöhnlichen Werdegang, den ich ganz kurz abreißen will. Er war schon als junger wilder Student Berater des damaligen tschechischen Präsidenten Václav Havel. Er hat später das Buch der Ökonomie von Gut und Böse geschrieben, die einst eigentlich als Dissertation gedacht war, als solche aber abgelehnt wurde, als Buch dann aber weltweit bekannt, als Bestseller und bereits in mehrere Sprachen übersetzt wurde. Heute berät Tomáš Sedláček wieder die tschechische Regierung und lehrt an der Karls-Universität in Prag Wirtschaftsgeschichte und Philosophie. Sein Referat nun, Distance is too close, local versus global. Herzlich willkommen, Tomáš Sedláček.
Good day to everybody, and let's spend the following 30 minutes thinking about the given topic. Please don't take me too seriously, okay, to start with. What I'm going to do is basically, it's like playing with Lego for adults. So I treat thoughts as Lego pixels, and sometimes the building is really nice. Sometimes maybe not everybody likes it. So everybody likes different types of buildings. But everybody loves Legos, especially Donald Trump, because I think there's an experiment that we should build the wall with Lego. Maybe that would be the only way in which to make sense. But let's be serious here a little bit, because I think one way how to read the current situation, or even one way how to read globalization, is exactly in the name of the topic, that the distance is too close. In other words, we are running out of distance. And there used to be Africa, there used to be China, there used to be Japan, and they used to be far when we were young. Nowadays, if anybody of you is interested in having a dinner with me in Tokyo, possible. With the time shift, no problem actually. We could maybe have a lunch somewhere in the meantime, and it wouldn't even ruin us financially. Not only is the distance in the real world too close, we see our sympathy is also stretched at unbelievable limits. So the suffering poor child in some deprived country is right in front of my face. The distance is too close. You know, when I grew up, we believed that love between parents and their children grows exponentially with the distance from which they live from each other. So, so you know that you have this tendency to hate the things that are the most near to you, the most, and in the moment that you are about to lose your mother, father, son, wife, daughter, lover, that's where you start missing them the most. But this clash, I want to demonstrate today together with you. I want to offer two biggest trends that I have found in the history of economy. You know that we economists or business people, or especially finance people, we focus on trends, monthly trends, weekly trends, long trends, short bears, etc., etc. So I took the other approach and I tried to look for the longest possible trend in the economy, and that would be going more and more abstract. That's one trend. And the other trend has a little bit to do with UFOs. So there will be a 5-minute of this speech where you will go, what? But then we will hopefully land back on the ground. I promised to the translator that I will use Star Wars references because she likes them more than Bible references. So for Bible references, please see YouTube and other solitary media. Okay, let's start with current affair. Now, there is an interesting Freudian slip of tongue in the main motto that won Donald Trump presidency. he ran with the motto, "Let's make America great again," as you all know. Now, I don't know whether you've noticed that there's an extremely interesting Freudian slip of tongue in this exclamation. Because last time I checked, no country called America. There is no such thing. It doesn't exist. It's fake news, okay? The only country that he could have meant, I'm not sure, could have been United States of America. But he didn't say anything about that, because finally we have a leader who doesn't only think about his small little constituency, but is a little bit like Angela Merkel. She thinks for the whole continent. So Americans are finally getting a president who doesn't think about USA only, but he wants Mexico to be great again. He wants Canada to be great again, because Canadians are also Americans, and Mexicans are also Americans, and the people from Bolivia and Venezuela and Argentina, those are all people who live in America, and they have now a great proponent who wants to make sure that the whole continent will be great again. And why is it a Freudian slip of tongue? Because he's right in that slip of tongue. The only way how to make, and I guess this is what he meant. I'm not sure. It's not very safe to misquote angry presidents. But I think he meant this. And I react, the only way how to make United States of America great again is to make America great again. So luckily, see, he treated somehow the egoistic American voter, and he got support to do great things for America. Now, let's go into this UFO struggle for a little while. This is the second trend. The first trend is this digitalization. Digitalization is something that we've seen from the beginning of mankind. The nations or the people who were able to be more abstract than their following peers, they were the ones who ended up being rich and being a leader. So in the beginning, it was important how to mine things, like copper and iron, and how to fish, and how to be at the crossroads of roads. So a fertile place was important. That's why we had wars. Now, fertile places are no longer important. You don't really care where the iron that made your car comes from. You don't know, I'm sure none of you knows, and most importantly, you don't care. And you shouldn't care, because it doesn't really matter. What matters is where that car was built. So either it's a German car or an Italian car or a Japanese car, and that defines the car, not the origin of the iron itself. So in little steps, you can see how we've been going more and more abstract and dematerializing ourselves and going global in the way that is much more global than a spatial globalness. Point A and point B, we've now created a space which isn't spaceful at all. There's a lot of space in the digital world, but it doesn't actually take a second to move from point A to point B, okay? So we now are living in the world where we call this digitalization, but this abstractization has in fact been going on all mankind, consuming matter, transforming it into spirit. Let me give you an example. How many of you actually have an alarm clock like the real one? An alarm clock that weighs about 2 pounds, has 2 bells on it, and there's a little hammer going on like ding, 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 ding to wake you up. How many of you have it? So there is still, yeah, your neighbor doesn't even believe you. Okay, so there are like 4 people, which is exactly the kind of number that I liked. Few, but not too many. And that is typical. You know this song, Video Killed a Radio Star? It didn't, but the digital killed the alarm. So only 3 people have an alarm in its body, but how many of you have an alarm like the spirit of the alarm? Yeah, and where do you have it? In your cell phone. Okay, so this is my example. I also don't have the real bodily alarm, but my alarm is, let me tell you, it's on the second, it's like giving directions. 2 left from the main road, second icon from the right. So that's where this is my alarm. This is where my alarm is. But if you open it up, of course, no surprise, no alarm. So what happened? We can say that the alarm clock is dead, but his spirit marches on. It's the spirit of the alarm that survived. This new alarm doesn't have physical properties, it doesn't die, it doesn't rot. It's much better than your original alarms because you can set your own favorite music, it can measure your sleep cycles, and it can, I don't know what, you can customize it perfectly. So it's much more an alarm than the physical alarm was, but that physical alarm was killed and the soul was vacuum cleaned and is kept, the spirit is kept chained in the servitude of this. In a nutshell, if I were to summarize all my thoughts to one sentence, the same process will happen to human beings as well. We will most likely see a disappearance of the world, moving it into an abstract world of sorts, and there having our habitat. You can already see how many things it vacuum cleaned. It, for example, vacuum cleaned your diary, if you noticed. It vacuum cleaned your camera. It vacuum cleaned your letters to your friends. It's called Facebook. It vacuum cleaned a stopwatch. It vacuum cleaned a torch. It vacuum cleaned books. There are, by the way, no books on the internet. There's not a single book on the internet. It's a soul of a book that's on the internet, because book means pages and bound letter and all that. That doesn't really live anymore, like dinosaurs, still sort of surviving, but dying. So the economy and mankind is shifting to a new place. The pendulum of our attention, if you spend more than 8 hours of your waking day looking into this black mirror, because it is a black mirror, there's always this scary moment when the screen goes off and you see yourself. It's very uncomfortable, but you're basically looking into yourself when you're looking into the digital. You can also say that the computer program is the most advanced form of mythology, because it is real, but it isn't really real. It makes reality more real than it is, but in itself, it doesn't really weigh anything. So I think today we are living in a time of great movement of nations from the world into a new world, that we are creating ourselves a home, a habitat on the internet. Already today you can imagine, it's imaginable that you would live on the internet. So if I locked you up in a cell, kept you there for a month, of course your basic biological needs taken care of, maybe your friends wouldn't even notice that you're not there in the work. And you could have your education, your entertainment, conversations with your friend, or your intimacies also on the internet, and cookbooks. So it is imaginable that we live on it. So this is one trend. This is this trend of going more and more abstract. You can see it very nicely when you compare the three last generations of titans in the industry. Let's go all the way back to IBM, Microsoft, Google. The difference between Microsoft and Google is that IBM made things from things. Yeah, it took down a tree or a little bit of copper that they found laying in the ground, and they turned it into a very high value added but piece of metal. Microsoft is one level more abstract. It doesn't really make anything tangible. You can't really knock on windows. You can knock on doors, but you can't really knock on windows. But you can still knocking on heaven's windows, maybe, is going to be our anthem 20 years from now. But you can still at least buy a Microsoft product. Yeah, the classical marketing strategies you can follow. And Microsoft employs people and it pays people for working for Microsoft, but it only creates structures. It creates computer programs, which is a structure. And one level up comes Google. Now, Google is a completely new animal, and it is yet one more level abstract than Microsoft, because you can't really even buy anything from Google. And you are working for Google even if you don't get paid. In fact, all of you are working for Google and none of you gets paid. It's a really nice way of avoiding the workers' unions. So the one who can figure out the fourth bubble, IBM, Microsoft, Google, will be rich. And I'm not telling you. Okay, so that's one trend. If you follow me, this is a trend that brings distances too close. And to start with this distances too close, have you also realized, and this is going to be a small biblical reference, I hope you will survive, that Jesus taught us to love our neighbor. Who's your neighbor today? What's the one thing that you never part? This is your neighbor. You should learn to love it. Okay? Don't hate it. It's your closest thing. It follows you everywhere. You sleep with it every night, the same thing, and it doesn't get boring. You touch it maybe the first thing in the morning. You take it to the toilet. You basically, for those of you that it still didn't click, look where we wear it. You know? Or here, close to the heart. This is our biggest neighbor. Now, my last thing that I'm going to say about this one trend is to say that it's a wormhole that allows us to be gated into this new world of habitat. So that's one trend, going into the abstract, and the one who can, there's never been a mistake in going too abstract, except for this island that sunk, unfortunately, Atlantis. But other words, all history, you've always been better off more abstract. So with the beginning of invention of mathematics and myths, all the way to creating a whole world on which we can live, that's the path that we are following. This is the longest trend in the history of capital markets, even before capital markets started. Trend number 2 is something that theoretical physicists use. They name civilizations. Any civilization is ranked according to how they use and how they harvest energy. Civilization type 1 can harvest the energy from the whole planet. This is where we're going UFO. Civilization type 2 can harvest the energy of their sun, of their local star, because of course the sun is shining in all directions, and only a very, very small part of that ray falls on planet Earth in this case. So if only you could take the shield the sun in some sort of a Dyson sphere, harvest the energy, then you are civilization type 2. Civilization type 3 is a civilization that can harvest the energy of the whole galaxy, in our case Milky Way, which is a sort of energy you need if you want to do time traveling and time warping and you want to do Star Wars and Star Trek combined. Now, why am I talking to you about UFOs? This interesting thing, the way this is called the Kardashev scale, and the way why physicists developed this was as an answer to a Fermi paradox. Fermi paradox says, why aren't there millions of civilizations hovering over the Earth? The universe existed for billions of years longer than Earth, and there are many habitable exoplanets everywhere. Why don't we? I was wondering why nobody's looking me in the eye. It's a strange moment when you get distracted by yourself, and even stranger when you get jealous on yourself. This is the distance. In order to create closeness, technology actually makes the distance even further, and I don't know, everybody's looking at me like this. Okay, anyway, but let's keep it for maybe if it's your pleasure to see me enlarged, well, then I can't complain. Anyway, so there is this Fermi paradox. A Fermi paradox says, why are we alone? Why aren't there civilizations? Why isn't the universe hovering with Star Wars-like scenarios where you have 30 types of races in the same room? Well, the answer to that is exactly civilization of filters, and it seems that the transition from civilization type 0, which is us, by the way, in case you didn't fill in the gap, we, planet Earth, are a civilization type 0. We can't even harvest the energy that falls on Earth. We're only harvesting a very small fraction of it. The transition from a civilization type 0, which is a local civilization, and now I am landing back on Earth, and I'm also landing back into the topic of local versus global. Type 0 is a global civilization, and type 1 is a planetary civilization. Type 1 has a planetary parliament, type 1 has a planetary decision-making, etc., etc. Type 0 has politics against something. Now, we are 0.86, because physicists, just like us economists, they like to be precise. And they say that in the next 60 or 80 years, this planet will transition from 0 to 1. And this transition could be a civilizational filter in which local civilizations will destroy each other over the dominancy. Now, if you connect these two trends, and where is my time? If you connect these two trends, you can read the Financial Times and Handelsblatt much more easier. This is exactly what's happening, for example, with Trump or with Europe. There is a rational American worker doesn't really fear cheap Mexican labor if he's a little bit, or she, a little bit smart. He will fear digitalization. So maybe there's a huge influx of cheap labor that can threaten a taxi driver in New York. But in 8, maybe 12, maybe 16 years, all taxi drivers will be jobless. And nobody knows what to do against that. Nobody has a clue, even among the philosophers or technicians. This is not a question of politics not wanting to listen to the experts. The experts don't know. And it's funny that in this extremely abstract time and an extremely abstract problem, a very educated country, such as the United States of America, actually gets lured by solutions involving walls. It's a very interesting psychological reversal to something very, very trivial. If the problem is too abstract to comprehend, we reduce the complexity to something very, very simple, in this case, a wall. The advantage of a wall is that everybody has one at home. And those who don't have one at home have one in their summer houses, and everybody understands the structure of a wall, but that's about it. The only way how this wall could be made useful is if it would be, in Prague we have a hunger wall. When people were running out of job, our very wise king built a useless wall just to build a wall. He was the sort of a pre-Keynesian before Keynes even was born. We already did this in Czech Republic. We didn't dig holes, we built walls, for which we are sorry. We have been an involuntary inspiration to some current politicians. But how will it look like, this new wall? Who will it build? Because if Americans will build it, then it will, of course, will be Mexican builders, and that would look really, really ironic. If the wall was there to protect Americans from cheap labor from Mexico, and the wall would be built by cheap labor from Mexico, that would be, not really good press. So the other option is to have Americans, real photogenic American-looking Americans, building a wall, which will be difficult because I don't think they've built one in 2 generations. They always had cheap labor from Mexico to do that. So I don't even know that they'll be able to build the wall by Americans, but it may do nice. So I think it will be pictures of nice Americans, and then they will go home and the real labor will come. So let me just really conclude if this is in any way useful. The distance has collapsed. We are building ourselves a completely new habitat that has nothing to do with the Earth. It is somewhat inspired by Earth, but the new virtual realities in which we will work will most likely have no laws that we need to bend in order to make the world look exactly the way we are. And crashing with this, we have a transition where we need to figure out a way how to have a global referendum, for example. Today we know that Brexit has begun, so it's also interesting to think about referenda. Here in Switzerland, you do them quite often, but if a nation that is not used to doing referenda suddenly does one, it tends to throw into it all sorts of other questions that are not asked. Whereas if you're used to it, you don't actually put into your referendum how much you hate your local governor or so. It will be the task of our generation to make sure that this technological blessing will not turn into a curse. Just imagine if there would be a cube of gold that would fall in the middle of Zurich. What would happen? Well, if it wouldn't be organized well, which is a very Swiss thing to do, I imagine. But let's imagine that for a moment you suspend your Swissness. you could crush your head over it. You could kill each other over who's going to get more gold. Or you can be an educated nation with good laws and say, okay, let's sit down and think about it. And then perhaps we find a nice way how to make this blessing become a blessing, not a curse. This is something that, ladies and gentlemen, we have to do together in exactly this digitalized world. And also, task number one. And task number two is to make sure that we do transition into a planetary type 1, because we must transition to a planetary type 1 civilization. The internet is already there. Business is already type 1, largely, you could say. But a typical world which is zero, local, is the world of politics. And we need to start thinking how to denationalize politics and be able to make good decisions together, because I believe that if Brexit, for example, would have been voted by all people of the European Union, which it should have been, it would have ended better than today. By the way, not a single advantage was found of Brexit till today, but many, many, many threats, dangers, and complications of being type 1, local, disattached civilization in the 21st century. Let's not use the solution from 19th century. Thank you very much.
Maybe you stay. Maybe you stay for another question. You talking about political, economic consequences of philosophical change. You also say that in a national economy, it's not the mathematical factors in the first place that matter. It's also about morality. Are you worried at the moment?
To give a very sort of banal answer is we can own the key, for example, the key to using driving-less cars, which is a huge advantage, is that we have to have our ethics straight. We have to make an ethical coming out. Okay, so there is a bus, and it's self-driving, and you can either kill an old lady or crush a bus with 20 10 years old kids. Which one should the car do? We still don't have such a basic question of ethics resolved. So we have to, first of all, put ethicians together. We have to translate this somehow into a mathematical code. So it's going to be an interesting cooperation. If we don't do this, if we won't be able to talk ethics, then we won't be able to use driverless cars, because the driverless car has to have some algorithm by which we decide. So let's imagine that in this room we all decide that, unfortunately, to drive the old lady is the thing to do when you have that ugly choice ahead of you. So maybe we here in Switzerland or in Europe will agree that, well, sorry, but 1 is less than 20. This is what has to be done. But how about India? Maybe in India they value old people more than young kids, which is just a question of some values or ethics. And it's very difficult to imagine that you would have Indian artificial intelligence ethics combined with, let's say, European. So I look at ethics as unlocking the possibilities. If an ethical nation gets a ton of gold dumped on its main street, it will be a blessing. Mm-hmm. If you take a ton of gold and you drop it in the middle of Mordor, the orcs will kill themselves over it. So maybe this is how we should bomb Mordor, with gold rather than with bombs, and they will destroy themselves. So in other words, we have to be sure that we are spiritually, let's say, or ethically ready for our technological advances. If we are not, then we are asking for trouble.
I've read that sometimes you're called an anti-economist. Do you like that, or is it a compliment, or you feel criticized by that?
Well, I was sort of worried, but then when I realized that the antimatter composes 96% of the mass of the universe, I felt slightly complimented if I'm the only anti-economist here. No, but I'm critical towards economics, not because I hate it, but because I actually quite like it. I think it's a little bit like a literature critique. A literature critique isn't a literature critique because he or she hates literature, but exactly because they care for it, or a movie critique actually likes movies, I hope. So in this way, I'm a critique of the economy or of capitalism. And I will say one more thing, that maybe economy has much more gravitational power than all religions and art combined together. That's one hugely positive thing about the economy, that it gravitates people who would otherwise fight with each other. There's something wrong with the matrix sometimes. To actually cooperate. That's the basic idea of European Union. I mean, we took the hippie, make love, not war. That's idealistic. Of course, we can't build a structure on love. So we built the structure on let's make trade and not war. So economy, interestingly, is something that pulls us into this type 1 much more than religion, even though it is always stated in religions that they should be loving to everybody and try not to, have too many quarrels. This has never been the case in history.
Okay. Thank you very much for
Thank you
coming
also.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Tomáš Sedláček.